Good morning. My name is Vince Meldrum. I'm with Earth Force. We're doing the NAAEE podcast here this morning, where we're talking about people's upcoming conference presentations and such. It's going to be a super amount of fun doing this. And this morning, I get the honor of talking to Angela Whittaker from the Institute for Humane Education. There was some confusion with that earlier, but Angela has 28 years as an educator. She has degrees in psychology and education. Comes from Tennessee, which we're not going to hold against her. And all my friends in Tennessee, sorry that I had to say that, but she has been a really innovative and exciting educator for a number of years. I've been reading a little bit about Angela, which has been fun, and she blends two superpowers as far as I can tell. She works with students with emotional and learning challenges, which we all know is a real challenge, and she's committed to something that I am personally committed to, which is engaging young people as agents of change and empowering them to be significant members of communities. And so that's something that I take very seriously. Angela has won a number of awards, including the Presidential Innovation Award for Environmental Education, and she founded the Full Circle Education Center, which is designed around whole student development, whole student education. And Angela, it's nice to meet you, and so
Well, nice
welcome.
to meet you, Vince. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here and talk about some things that I'm passionate about, and I actually sound pretty good when you read it like that.
Oh, you sound pretty good all the time, that's for sure. If it was that in that Tennessee accent, if we could. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
That's what my
Could you?
boss says. That's why I'm not allowed to record all the videos for the Institute because it's a little too Southern. So
You can never be too Southern, right? Because all the fried foods that just makes Southern good. That's
there
all
you
I have to
go.
say
There
about
you
that.
go.
Before we start, can you tell me a little bit about the Institute for Humane Education?
Sure. Well, it's been around a long time. It was founded by Zoe Weil and another person in like 28 years ago. And I did not know about them until about 3 years ago when I shifted from running my private school and looking for something kind of at the latter end of my career where I was going to do some meaningful work with young people to get them into action and community involvement. And so the Institute, right now we're working in over 50 countries. I think we're up to 57. And we do
Wow.
all kinds of things, right? We have mainly what I'm involved in is our K-12 program, where we work with educators to help them learn how to facilitate really meaningful student-led action and do some really cool things around systems thinking and ethical analysis of what we want to do in the world and making sure we do the most good and least harm. So it's a fantastic organization, and I have to say it's one of the best career moves I've ever made.
Well, that's always good, right? It's good to
Right.
make the best career moves. Hopefully
Yeah.
your boss is listening to this and
Right. See, that's
she can jump in
I'm
there.
vying
So
for a raise, Vince. So I'm hoping that's
nice. Well, we'll forward it to her later, just
right.
to make sure she gets a good job on the raise part. So at the conference, you are doing the true price activity as a presentation. I take it that has nothing to do with The Price is Right or Bob Barker or any of that stuff.
No, but I did like Bob Barker. No, it really is
Me too.
about giving students it's really about giving students perspective and understanding so they can make informed decisions. So we're going to use an example. What we did is take just a common object. We chose a spiral notebook, and we walked teachers through having kids really think about the entire process of from sourcing the materials all the way through disposal and what's involved. And the beautiful thing that I love about what the Institute has done with this particular lesson is they've shaped it where we always look at what is the impact on human, animal, and environment. And I know that humans are animals, but we pull that apart because we don't always think of ourselves, it's always how does it benefit humanity, but then how does it also impact the world around us? And so it's a very powerful and transformative lesson for students to experience. And so we had a nice conversation with some teachers, and I think there's a lot of experienced people who are going to be putting this into action in their classrooms. So it's really exciting.
That's fantastic. Years ago, like 20 years ago, a good friend of mine worked at Staples, the office supply store, and he had convinced them to do life cycle ownership of product, right? So from the moment it comes in the store to the moment that you're done with it, they were proposing to be responsible for that product, its entire life cycle. And I've always thought, man, that is something that is such a powerful idea, right? And something so powerful that we should be teaching young people, but we don't really think about, beyond our own, this plastic bag that I use for 6 seconds to get from the 7-Eleven to my house. We're not thinking about the impact beyond that little
Right.
6 second period. It
And
sounds
it's
like your activity
thousands.
is to help kids understand that.
Yes, and it's thousands of decisions we make every day, right? And they're simple things, turning off a light when you leave the room is, I remember in the 70s we had this big, saving energy innovation. That's where I kind of got my teeth into this, but it's really about helping kids understand that everything we do is going to impact something. And we can't extract ourselves from systems. Like we are going to participate in the food system in some way. We're going to participate in energy production and consumption some way. So the question is, how can we do that doing the most good and least harm? And how can we do that conscientiously to really think about and make a choice, an informed decision around what we buy, where we buy it, how we use it, when we dispose of it. And it really shines an interesting light on the mindset of consumption. Why do we think we need the things we're purchasing? I think
Right.
there's a lot of things that we have been convinced we have to have, and we just really don't need them. Or perhaps when we do need them, how are we understanding the process of that product and all the impact along this production? And you hear about the life cycle and you think of circular, but really it's a linear system. We are not in a world where we are actually disposing and moving things back into a
Yeah.
circular cyclical system. We're just not there yet. And that's another thing we bring to the table, is to say, really think about how can we re-engineer products and redesign our thinking and our production systems so that we're not ending with disposal and distraction of new materials again.
Yeah. Well, I will say that you and I remember very different things from the 70s, but as you were saying that, I was kind of curious, reading your bio and your background in emotionally challenged and learning challenged young people. Do you guys do some of this work, around this activity or other activities with those audiences as well? And if so, how well does it work for them?
Well, I think I'm going to reframe it a little bit, because I think
Please
every
do.
student
Yeah.
sitting in a K-12 classroom today has a certain amount of emotional and, anxiety. And I think more and more every kid we experience in our classrooms falls into those categories. You know, whatever the issue is, the pressures of being a young person today are pretty intense. And especially when we start talking about climate change and all of the things that are happening to the planet that seem so far beyond their reach. So the second presentation I'm doing on Thursday is called Climate Hope. Um, how we can transform young people's thinking and relationship to what's going on in the world through student action. And so I am a firm believer that how we approach young people and how we empower them with agency and information is the antidote to that anxiety and emotional problems. When I was in the classroom and I had the students, I was the teacher that got all the kids who, when the teacher looked at their roster and they went, "Oh no, I've got so and so," oh, that they would come to me. Those were my kids, because they felt like they were involved in something real in my classroom. They were building something, creating something, taking action in the community in such a way that it gave them placement. It gave them a sense of belonging and importance that they had not found elsewhere. I have always said, there's no magic bullet in education, until I started seeing the impacts of what happens when we put kids in the driver's seat and let them create meaningful real world solutions. I started this in 2007. I transitioned away from special education and more into the environmental sustainability education world. And it is the most transformative, impactful thing I've ever seen or experienced as a teacher.
Well, you're singing my song now. That's our entire shtick at Earth Force is student agency, right? We push for civic engagement, but we say there are three experiences that kids have to have. They have to choose a project, problem, issue that they care about that impacts their lived experience. They have to work in partnership with youth adult partnerships, and then we're firm believers that young people need to advocate for change to power, right? And that's kind of our we've really narrowed that down, right? There are probably a lot of expansive ideas of how kids can demonstrate agency, but for us, we've said it's this thing, and because we want kids to be involved in policy making later on in life, we think that's the bridge to get there. So when you say kids have agency and are working on real world problems and stuff, give me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Well, it can be a myriad of things, but one of the things, and I think what the Institute for Humane Education and Earth Force are doing we're just marching down the same road together, right, and doing the same things. So, for example, I had students that we had a project come up out of the blue. I did an outdoor gardening class, and so we were growing food and doing all kinds of things, and kind of an introductory middle school class. And I was eating lunch with my class in the cafeteria, and they looked at my plate and they said, "Why don't you eat from the cafeteria?" And I said, "Because it's all brown. And I don't like all that brown food." So they started to say, "What do you mean?" So we had this conversation, and long story short, they said, "Well, why don't we grow food for the cafeteria, and what would that look like?" And so what started as a lighthearted conversation and lunch led to a 7-year project. We ended up growing lettuce for the cafeteria, which put a salad bar in place. We put in composting bins, vermiculture bins, and this is over a course of years, right? So
Yeah.
we took something that was a conversation, and there was a concern because I had kids who had a food scarcity issues in a very rural part of Virginia where I live. But we took those interests in that conversation and we built it into something that they owned. And so every year my kids would take a walk with me and we would say, "What do we want to do this year?" And they would decide where to drive that bus, so to speak. And you can do that in anything, right? Right now I'm teaching a course for educators in Virginia for meaningful watershed experiences, MeWEs, but we're looking at solutions that the kids own, and they're multi-layered. We've really identified like 5 things the kids can do, and that policy change and that call for advocating with our representatives is definitely a piece of a lot of what we do. But it's also, if you're going to take an immediate action, that's great. But how do we get at the root cause of this issue? And that's one of
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
things the Institute has built in is a systems analysis part, and that has such power to help kids understand that it's behavioral and structural policy and mindsets that all have to shift to really move the needle.
Yeah.
And the more agency we give them, the more opportunity we give them to do something physical that they can point to. We planted those trees. We advocated for these solar panels to be installed. We built those raised bed gardens. We helped that litter pick up, whatever it is, right? The more we can do that and couple it with the call for action from our whoever's in charge, whether it's the school board or local politicians, or I had kids present to the local board of supervisors more than once. Some of it was great, and some of it got me into the paper with editorials.
Excellent.
It was always an interesting,
You're not doing it right if
whether or
you're
not
not
the
getting in
community
trouble.
agreed with my kids or not. But that's it. It's give them a voice and give them a choice, and I promise you they'll surprise you
Every time. I think that's
every
the
time.
I love that you say that that's the magic bullet in education. I really do think that's true. And I think there are larger movements outside of environmental education that are coming to grips with this, whether they're calling it authentic learning or project, well, some project-based learning. I have to say that I'm disappointed in a lot of project-based learning, but yeah, but there are a lot of groups out there. But I will say about all that, MeWe is the dumbest name for a program.
I didn't come up with that.
I
No,
know.
it is an
Hopefully
odd, it
Shannon
is an
Sprague from
odd
NOAA is
acronym.
listening
Yeah.
to this because I just wanted to call out that I think that's a bad name. Um,
Well,
tell
since
me.
I'm
Oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to say I'm writing grants for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, so I'm not going to talk bad about the MeWe. But go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah, I don't think so. That's a cheat. That was me, not Angela. Just a
Right.
note
Thank
for
you.
everybody out there. So, um, tell me what what you've seen that it's been fun, or what's excited you, and or what you're hoping to see.
What's exciting to me is to see how many people are here and we're all rowing in the same direction. I've been to several presentations. They've all been good in their own way and really helped me to think, about what I'm doing and kind of help me to reflect on how I can be better at it. But the most exciting thing is just seeing the number of young people. You know, I have struggled to get young people involved. And so I'm enjoying seeing the youth part and hearing youth voice in some of these presentations. That's been really exciting. And I think the looking forward to is kind of following up. I've made some interesting contacts and people have reached out and we've connected in some really interesting ways. And I'm looking forward to seeing how we might be able to collaborate. And that's thanks to NAAEE, right? And being here in this interesting virtual forum for a conference.
Well, I did promise that we would take a moment and make fun of Carrie Albright, who's worked on the back end of this. But we're not going to do that. I'm gonna take it back. I'm not going to do it. He is the sweetest person. But all of the all of the NAAA people, I think this is a hard job running a virtual conference, and and I know they've worked really hard to pull it
Mhm.
together, and it's just a challenge, to do this many things simultaneously every day for days on end. And this is like their fifth day in a row, right? So
Right. And
it's
what the
pretty
thing I love
crazy.
about it though, the thing that that's been very, very prevalent for me in my consciousness about it is the lack of carbon footprint. Like how much travel didn't happen.
Yeah,
All of the things that go into a conference that impact people, planet, and animals, right? And so I'm really proud of NAAE for doing this. I think it has a lot to say too about their mission and vision and how they
yeah,
approach this. So good for them, and I
yeah.
appreciate it.
I do want to slide back to what you said about sessions you've sat in and how many of them are singing kind of the same song or walking down the same trail. I think every session, and it might be about the ones that I'm choosing, but I think every session that I've sat in on has talked about youth agency or youth choice. And you're not the first person to say root cause analysis to me, right? And it's something that we have talked about for years. And in fact, our cause analysis is in MeWe 101 class. If you're ever curious, it's sitting in there. Um, and MeWe is a great name, but, but uh, sorry, I just can't help
Hmm.
myself with that one. I got to work on that. But it's been it's been exciting to me because I do think it's so important, as I've said before, and how important it is to have kids. But it's been really interesting to see so much of that, having come to these for years, and that idea of youth agency, is really blossoming right now. Environmental education.
It is, and as with most things, and I know I'm familiar with Earth Force's framework, and IHE we have our own, framework. And one of the things that really is important is this latter part of when we ask kids to innovate solutions and we ask them to then go and implement it. Teachers are not trained to do that. That does
No.
not, there's not a course somewhere that says this is how you facilitate a massive project in your community, right? So that's a big hurdle we're all going to have to work toward, and I think that
Well,
that's
especially
really
not
really
science
important.
teachers, right? I mean,
Yes,
some of them, and then I'm not trying to speak ill of teachers, but they barely, understand the functioning of government, let alone to get their kids out, teaching their kids how to participate in civic stuff. And I don't, I'm not trying to, like I said, denigrate teachers. It's just not their specialty, right? It's not where they've
right.
spent their time trying
And
to
and
learn.
how do you? It's the logistical thing too, right? Like I had kids working to install landscaping at the elementary school. We redid landscaping because of erosion and some other things. So we were helping out and they redesigned the entire thing. Well, I had to logistically figure out, equipment and community partners. I had to figure out parental permission slips and safety issues and things that when you take those kids beyond the classroom walls, who's teaching us that? Where do you learn that? I just always dove in and
Why
erred
don't
on
we
the
make the
side
kids do
of
it?
caution, right? But we do have to think about how are we supporting educators moving into that. That's one of my
We
big
do.
things. I'm the
Yeah.
practical person on my team, right? I'm like, yeah, but how does that translate into the classroom? And what does
Yeah.
that look like for the educator? That's the key piece we all have to think about moving forward, I think.
Yeah. I totally agree, though I'm not the practical person on our team. I'm the one that's like, let's do this great big thing. And they're like, how would you do that? And I'm like, well, that's your problem.
Right. Okay. I see the real you now, Vince.
Yeah. There is no real me more than that. Um, so let's we're about out of time. And I had said to you in an email, I said, hey, let's, because the NAAA podcast is called The World That You Want. And so what's the world that you want, Angela Whittaker? This is your
Well,
life. Do you
my
remember that
moment,
show?
right? So
Yeah.
the world that I want is I really do want to see public education, education in general in the United States. I know IHE is global, but I'm going to just talk about the USA. I want to see the paradigm shift. I want to see an educational system that listens to kids, listens to the student voice, and offers them authentic, real world application to what they're learning. We have to make it relevant because I believe if we shift K 12 education, so goes the world.
There you go. That is very nice. Yeah. And it stays on brand, right? You believe in education. I'm going to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to Angela Whittaker from the Intensely Very Humane Education Institute for Education, or the Institute for Very Humane or Intensely Humane Education, for joining us. And I hope that people, oh, I didn't ask you what time your presentations are.
2:30 tomorrow, 2:30 Eastern time tomorrow is the I've already done the True Prize, but the Climate Hope presentation is tomorrow
Oh, I
afternoon.
screwed up. Sorry. Sorry about that.
It's all
Um,
good.
yeah. So 2:30 tomorrow. Today is Wednesday. That means 2:30 tomorrow, November 6th, and that's Eastern time.
Mhm.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. This is Vince Meldrum. That's Angela Whittaker, and we're out.